Welcome to Monochemistry. Today we're going to look at how to balance very simple chemical equations. In another lesson we'll look at how to balance slightly more complicated ones, and then there's a third type that's really hard. If you take Chemistry 12, you can look at that video. But for right now, we're just going to do the basic ones. So what I'd like you to do as you watch this video is I'd like you to write down the steps and any other important information as we go through each step that you think would be important for balancing these things, because you're going to have to do a lot of this in chemistry. So it's very important that you understand how to do it. And these basic steps will help you do that. So step one to balancing our simple equations is to balance any metal atoms or ions. So before you balance anything else, you balance the metal ones. That's step one. Now, what the heck do I mean by metal atoms? Well, on your periodic table, you folks should probably recall that there's a step ladder. Okay, the step ladder separates the metals on the left-hand side from the non-metals on the right-hand side. So you're going to look for any metals, atoms or ions first. What do I mean by balance? Well, when I say to balance, I mean to make sure that the number of atoms of a particular type of element is the same on both sides of the arrow. That would be this guy right here. Okay? So for instance, right now, I have 1 sodium. I know it's a 1 because there's nothing written next to it. And over here, on this side of the arrow, on the what we call the product side of the arrow, I have 2. Okay, so there's 1 on one side, the reactant side, and there's 2 on the product side, 2 on the other side. So I have to balance that. Alright, one other quick thing I want to mention before I go any further. I'm going to go ahead and balance this with you. Metals tend to show up at the beginning of compounds. Okay, so if you're looking for the metals, that's where you're going to find them. The non-metals, or the polyatomic ions, usually show up at the end of the compound when they're written out properly. Okay, so we've got sodium. We've got 1 sodium here. We've got 2 sodiums here. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and, if I've got 2 on one side and 1 on the other, I have to multiply one side by such a number so that they're equal. And since I can't change this number here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this sodium by 2. So I'm going to put a 2 out front. Now, unfortunately, what that does is it also multiplies this guy here by 2. Okay, so I have to be aware of that for later on, because any number out front gets multiplied all the way through, just like in math. Alright, so there's my sodiums. I have two sodiums on each side. My other metal is barium. I've got 1 there and 1 there, so that's good. So there's step 1. Step 2 is to balance any nonmetals, including polyatomic ions. However, you're not supposed to balance any oxygens or hydrogens. Okay? Now, the exception, of course, there is as you balance your polyatomic ions, of which this is 1 right here, you may actually be also balancing some oxygens and hydrogens. That's fine. When I say don't balance the oxygens or hydrogens, I mean the ones that are in things like water or other compounds like carbon dioxide, or simply by themselves, hydrogen or oxygen when they're written by themselves. Don't balance those guys until later on. Okay, but go ahead and balance your polyatomic ions. Okay, so look at my polyatomic ions. I'll start with sulfate. Here's my other polyatomic ion. And it just so happens I don't have any nonmetals other than polyatomic ions here. So I've got 1 sulfate, and you always look at them as a whole thing. You always treat polyatomic ions, especially if you see them on both sides of the equation, as a unit, like as one thing. So I've got 1 here, and I look over here, and I've also got 1 sulfate here. So those are already balanced. Now, over here, I have nitrate. And as you can see, I have 2 of those. See that little 2 there? Now, I originally only had 1 nitrate up here. But because I've put this 2 here, guess what? I now have 2 nitrates. So it would appear that my polyatomic ions, my nonmetals in this particular equation, are in fact balanced. Step 3 is to balance any hydrogens. Now, there aren't any hydrogens in this equation, okay? But like I said before, if you had any hydrogens in things like water or some other compound or by itself, okay, that you hadn't already balanced in your polyatomic ions, etc., you would balance them now. But we don't have any, so we're just going to skip that step for now. Step 4 is to balance any oxygens. Now, I'm going to give you a little trick here. If there's no oxygens by themselves or in compounds like water, carbon dioxide, etc., then they're already balanced. Okay? You've got polyatomic ions here, and because the polyatomic ions are balanced, your oxygens are already balanced. So you don't have to do it again. The very last step, one that I would always recommend, is to double check and make sure all parts are balanced. Okay, so go back through. I've got 2 sodiums here. I've got 2 sodiums here. I've got 2 nitrates here. I've got 2 nitrates here. I've got 1 barium here and 1 barium here. I've got 1 sulfate here, and I've got 1 sulfate there. Everything on both sides of the equation is balanced out. Now, just to show you that this actually does work, I'm going to go ahead and show you how many oxygens I have on each side. Okay? So nitrate, 1 nitrate has 3 oxygens, but there's 2 of them, so that makes 6. So there's 6 oxygens here, and there's 4 oxygens over here in this compound, okay, which makes a total of 10. Over here, I have 4 oxygens here. 2 times 3 equals 6, and I have 10 oxygens down here as well. The whole thing is balanced. We're good to go. All right, so here is another example. I want you to follow the steps. This one is a little bit harder, okay? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to write this equation down on your piece of paper, and I want you to try it. I want you to then pause the video. Pause it right now. Try it, and I'm going to put the answer up here for you. Okay? And I'm going to go through how to do it. So you pause it, you try it, and then you can come back. If you didn't get it, you can see how I did it. Okay? All right. So, first step, balance your metals. Well, I've got 1 barium here, 1 barium here. Done. No more metals. H is not a metal. Cl is not a metal. OH isn't a metal. Only barium is a metal. Look on your periodic table. You'll see that. Next thing I do is balance any nonmetals other than oxygen and hydrogen. Okay, so look here. I've got a Cl here, and I've got a Cl2 here. So what do I need to do? I need to put a 2 right there. Because now I've got 2 chlorines there and 2 chlorines there, and that's balanced. Okay? Next thing, I've got a polyatomic ion here, this one right here, but I don't have it on this side. Right? Now there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can either forget about the polyatomic ion and go ahead and then balance your hydrogens and oxygens, or, here's a little trick, you can rewrite water as HOH. Okay? So, how many OHs do I have on my reactant side? I have 2. How many OHs do I have right here? I have 1. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 2 out front of the water. Trust me, it's a good trick. Okay, now, how many hydrogens did I have here? Well, I had 2 because I multiplied this by 2. So I have 2 hydrogens. Now you're saying, well, Mr. Monahan, I've got 4 hydrogens here now. Yeah, but watch. If I put a 2 out front of this, if I write it like this, 2 hydrogens and 2 hydroxides. Works out to be the same thing. So here's a little trick. Anytime you have an OH on one side and a water on the other, it really helps to write HOH like that. Okay, let's double check, see if this is balanced. Got 2 hydrogens, 2 hydrogens, 2 chlorines, 2 chlorines. I've got 1 barium, 1 barium. I've got 2 hydroxides, 2 hydroxides. Check. Balanced. Woo! Alright, if you didn't get it, come back, watch the video again, get your notes sorted out. We're going to do a lot of these. This is very important for chemistry. If you can't do this, you're going to have a lot of trouble going forward. So let's get this sorted out. Ask any questions in class.